Hey guys, it's Time and Peace, and welcome back to another video. Before we go on, I just want to say Happy New Year's. 2020 hasn't been a great year at all for all of us, and I wish I could say that this year would be your best, your most amazing year ever, but I'm a little on the fence on saying those things. I think that that could be more damaging to you. So I just hope that this year is a tad bit better for you and I than the previous one. And if we manage that, I see that as a massive success. And once again, Happy New Year's, guys. And speaking of New Year's, 2021 marks the 140th year of Seiko. And to celebrate this milestone, Seiko has come out with, guess what, another limited edition, but this time of the 1965 King Seiko KSK. Now, before we go into any further, it's a little confusing for me when they say that they are recreating the 1965 KSK. What is that? They say that they're recreating the second generation of the King Seikos, where they saw massive improvements in the design. I'm really confused what exactly is the 1965 KSK. I could not find anything on this. My guess and common sense dictates is that they are referring to the 44 King Seiko that was released in 1964, and which was the second generation of the King Seikos that saw massive design improvements. I'm just going to go through the video thinking that they are referring to the 44 King Seiko. If any King Seiko enthusiast or expert is watching, please enlighten me in the comments below. With that out of the way, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the watch itself and a little history about the King Seiko. So let's take a little look at the watch. My first impression of the watch, I just have to say right away that this watch is stunning. They did a very good job, in my opinion, in recreating the 44 King Seiko. A lot of the elements that represents the 44 King Seiko is present here. And I'm mostly talking about the grammar of design. As hard it may seem to imagine, until 1956, Seiko did not have a dedicated design department. So their watches, especially the higher end ones, were having a hard time distinguishing itself apart from its Swiss competitors. It was only when Taro Tanaka, a recent design graduate, joined Seiko that he was able to formulate a problem for this. Taro Tanaka was thinking to himself, how can Seiko distinguish itself from the Swiss? And his answer to this problem was light, figuratively and literally. You see, he was inspired by gem cutting, and he wanted to design rules that would literally glow up the watch. And he set 4 key rules and call them the grammar of design. Here's a brief outline of the 4 rules. First is that all surfaces, including the dial, the hands, the markers, even the case, they should all be flat and geometrically shaped so that light can bounce off it perfectly. Second, the bezels must feature a 2-dimensional faceted curve. Third, there should be no room for visual distortions, and the cases must be mirror finished. And lastly, each watch case should be unique to that reference and not be mass used for every other watch that they make. So after Taro Tanaka came up with this grammar of design, the first King Seiko to actually benefit from all of these rules was the 44 King Seiko that came out in 1964. So this really is a special and unique timepiece. And we could see all those characteristics in this recreation of that model. First thing that draws me in the dial is those razor sharp hands. They're so sharp that I imagine I would cut myself if I were to actually touch them. Obviously I won't, but that's how sharp and clean they look. And if you look closely, they are not just razor sharp like swords, but they are beveled in the edges. And I believe that Taro Tanaka's inspiration for gem cutting was incorporated in these areas. Because the edges of these flat hands are beveled, they reflect light amazingly well on all angles and sparkle when the light is bounced off its surface. And let's look at the indices. At first glance, they may look like your average applied markers, blocks of rectangle, but they are not. The surface, like the watch itself, is very flat, but the edges are also beveled, and this creates a sparkling effect when light is bounced off, much like the hands. Again, a perfect example of the grammar of design being incorporated. And one area of the dial that especially grabs our attention would be the 12-hour marker. It's that trademark 12-hour marker that is multifaceted, and this one is really intriguing. You have these two blocks of applied markers that are almost like grids, and on top of that, in the middle of these two blocks are, for lack of better words, they are like a skateboard ramp. I'm sorry, my imagination is a little weird, but yeah, they are these. There's a slope that meets at an angle in between these markers. I think that's beautiful. And although it may seem simple, I think this is very creative and I absolutely love it. And one last thing about the dial we have to talk about is the window date that has been added at the 3 o'clock marker. Now, the original 44 King Seiko was a no date. It had no complications, but they decided to add one in this re-release. Some people don't like it. Some people think they ruined it because they added the window date. And I could understand where they're coming from. If you're a die-hard King Seiko fan, especially of that era, and you really love the original 44 King Seiko and hope that they made a perfect recreation of this, you could be disappointed with the addition of the date complication. So I totally understand. But I think the date window is pretty nice. Watches, first of all, have to be functional, and one of the most basic and used complications are the date function. I'll tell you that for me, I use the date complication a lot of times and it comes in handy. So it's just a great addition of functionality for me, and even aesthetically speaking. Now, I've only looked at this watch for about a week now, so I can't formulate a deep opinion on it. But for now, I quite like how they designed the date window. You see, it's quite interesting. They didn't just get rid of the 3rd hour indices, but they cut it almost in half and connected it to that date window. And that date window also follows the grammar of design. If you can see closely, they are flat and they are beveled inwards in the edges, and that is just elegant in my opinion. So that's all I have to say about the dial. And another hallmark of the King Seiko is its lugs. It is very angular, sharp, flat, and they also adhere to the grammar of design. They are Zaratsu polished and mirror finished. This watch just screams elegance to me, and I would love to own this watch, but I cannot. You know what? I'm gonna save this for the end of the video. So let's look at the case back of the watch. It features the traditional King Seiko emblem with a crown. Now, based on my knowledge, they used to have the word King Seiko and just Seiko applied at the back, but I guess that they went with King Seiko for this one. Now, the crown for this watch has a W on it. And a lot of you guys might be wondering what this W means. It means it is water resistant. In fact, this watch has a water resistance of 50 meters. But I would not take this watch close to any bodies of water, and I don't think you should as well. So now let's get into the movement. This is where a lot of people are mad. So Seiko has decided to put in the 6L35 movement for this watch. It features a 45-hour power reserve and 28,800 VPH. And a lot of people have a problem with that. Seiko has introduced this movement in 2018, and they haven't really been using it that much. These movements have been used in the mid to upper end of the Prestige line, and most of them were limited editions as well. And a $3,500 watch for a 6L35 movement, people are going to have a problem with that. That could be seen as one of the biggest problems that people have with this watch that I understand too. Just a little more basic details on this watch. It does use a sapphire glass that is air coated in the inside, and the watch diameter comes in 38.1 millimeter, which is a great size, although it is slightly bigger than the 44 King Seiko. So now that we've talked about this recreation, I think it's a good time to look back in history and see the origins of the King Seiko. So beginning in 1959, Seiko had two competing factories, the Suwa Seikosha and Tiny Seikosha. Tiny meaning literally second. Suwa Seikosha first came out with the Grand Seiko in 1960, and after a year, Tiny produced its first King Seiko. And the reason why Seiko decided to have these two competing factories was purely a corporate strategy. By fueling internal competition, they can stir innovation and creativity. So in 1961, Daini Seiko came out with the first King Seiko. And this King Seiko was not all that great. It was good, but it was not really different from the Grand Seikos. But its second generation, the 44 King Seiko that came out in 1964, was legendary. This watch, like I've mentioned earlier, incorporated the grammar of design that Taro Tanaka had formulated and was this gorgeous, angular, and unique watch. So Seiko finally had something that could compete against the Swiss and make an identity for Seiko. And I would say that this watch is one of the most important timepieces that Seiko have ever created. It heavily influenced Grand Seiko, and Seiko, the 44 Grand Seiko, is based off on the 44 King Seiko. And the 44 Grand Seiko became a model for the future Grand Seikos. So we could say that the 44 King Seiko was the genesis, or at least one of the big influences. Now, before going on, there is a big misconception among the watch community, and they think that the Suwa Seiko factory and Daini Seiko factory produce Grand Seikos and King Seikos exclusively. And that is not true. While it is true that these factories were mainly focused on producing Grand Seikos and King Seikos, there were times where these factories produced Grand Seikos and King Seikos. So to say that they were exclusively making Grand Seikos and King Seikos are not really accurate. Moving on, these two factories were indeed competing with each other, the King Seikos and Grand Seikos. But in 1974, the King Seikos and Grand Seikos were no more due to the quartz revolution that was changing the industry. But in 1998, Seiko came back and revitalized the Grand Seiko line, but this time it didn't have its former rival to compete with. So that became the end of King Seiko. And after decades, we're now getting a recreation of the watch, which is something to be really happy about. And I could really see why people are so excited and happy that the King Seiko is finally getting the spotlight and attention that it truly deserves. Now, if you've been watching the video, you could tell that I like this watch. I think it's beautiful. I love the heritage. I love what it stands for. It's a beautiful, elegant watch, but I cannot see myself pay $3,500 for this watch. I just can't. I believe that's the price that Seiko has set, and they will start selling in January, probably in the mid-January or late January. But I'm not gonna pay $3,500 for this watch. Let's think about it. $3,500. I could do a lot with $3,500. I could buy so many watches, especially if you go to the aftermarket. There are so many great watches in the $3,500 to $4,000 range, and I can't see myself buying the King Seiko over them. Not because I don't like the King Seiko, but I just don't think it's worth $3,500, especially with the movement that they use. Lastly, and this is the most important, you could find a vintage 44 King Seiko for around $600 to $700 on eBay, which obviously has more history and is the original watch that they are basing it off. And they are also stunning and elegant. And for those people who hate the date window on the recreation, you're probably happy with getting the vintage, the original 44 King Seiko. So for me, having alternatives is very important. And it seems that the King Seiko has a perfect alternative. With all that said, if you have the money and you want to buy this watch, absolutely go ahead. But just take a quick look at the original 44 King Seiko and think to yourself if you can really justify buying a 500% markup for this recreation. So that basically sums up what I wanted to say in this video. It was really fun for me looking back in Seiko's history and knowing more about the King Seiko, which I knew about, but I didn't know it in a deeper level. And now I could say that I definitely appreciate the watch a lot more. And it's actually heightened my appreciation for the Grand Seiko as well. And hopefully someday I can get myself a Grand Seiko. I hope that day is soon. So I think I'll leave things here. Oh, I almost forgot, but it seems that there's a custom in YouTubers that talk about watches where they do a wrist check. And since I would like to put myself in that category, I think I'll start doing them as well. It's a fun custom, I think. So late wristwatch check. I am wearing my 007 on a NATO strap. Also, I'm trying to change the NATO band, so If you have any recommendations for a brand that you suggest, please comment down below. That's the end of my video. If you guys enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to my channel. And I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thanks.